Alright, hey everyone, Card Cafe here again with some more set 11 goodness. Now that it's finally here, I'm waiting so long and now I've got a lot to talk about. But today we are talking about Mr. Lightning Boy himself, the new version of Draconic Kaiser Vermillion. Pretty cool deck, very kind of like an anti-meta in a lot of ways, really makes it hard for certain decks to function just because of the aggressive binding that this deck can do. Let's get started first talking about the ride line, the good old boys returning for that nostalgia trip that Bushy just really wants to milk from us. You got your Spark Trick Kid Dragoon. When you ride on top of him, if you're going second, draw a card, just like all the other ones. And then we got Red River Dragoon over here, which is when he is rode upon by a grade 2 with Narcomi in his clan. So when you ride over with him, you can just search your deck for the Eternal Thunderbolt order and add it to your hand, which we will talk about shortly. But then the grade 2 says, when he's rode upon by a grade 3 with Narcomi in its clan, you get to check top 7 and add a Narcomi unit, or a Narcomi card, excuse me, to your hand from those top 7. So that's a really good skill. You get to look at top 7 for anything really from the Narcomi clan, which is 90% of the deck, including Persona Rides, which is very nice. You can just look at top 7. If Vermillion's there, just add it. You just plus the Persona Ride to hand. So really like that skill. Simple, but effective. However, let's talk about the boy himself. Mr. Lightning, pretty cool card and nice to have in this current standard format that we have. So we've got 2 skills. First, Axe skill, Counterblast 1 once per turn. You get to choose 2 units with only Narcomi in their clan again. And this does include himself, by the way. It's not rear guards, it's choose units. And you give 2 of them 5,000 power until the end of turn. Now, this also activates the effect that when he attacks, you choose 2 of your opponent's rear guards, and this unit battles all of the units chosen rear guard and your opponent's vanguard. So really strong skill. You get to counterblast 1, give usually himself and something other Narcomi unit 5,000 power, and then he can attack and hit the opponent's vanguard and 2 other of their rear guards. So very strong, keeps pressure on the board, especially when we talk about the Eternal Thunderbolt order, which we'll get to in a second. But he also has a second skill, which is just so good. At the end of the battle that this unit attacked, if you played a normal order this turn, once per turn, and if your opponent is at 4 or less damage, discard a card from your hand, choose one of your opponent's vanguard, and deal it 1 damage. We have a ping back, ladies and gentlemen, in the standard format. It is locked behind your opponent being at 4 or less, which, you know, fair, but you still great for pushing that damage. You're trying to be aggressive. Your opponent perfect guards or blocks Vermillion. You're still dealing them at least 1 point of damage. So triggers still activate, which is kind of annoying, but you're still pushing the damage, which is the important part. So love that skill. Now, we've mentioned it a few times, so let's talk about Eternal Thunderbolt, the order made specifically for Vermillion. Now, a couple things going on here. Firstly, if you have a Vanguard with Vermillion in its name and Narcomi as its clan, you can play this from the drop zone, which is fantastic. And the main reason why we're only running this at 3 copies. Because the main thing, what it does is it gives your Vanguard the continuous skill, which is that when your Vanguard would hit an opponent's rear guard, you bind it instead of retiring. Huge skill to give to your Vermillion Vanguard who is attacking at 2 of your opponent's rear guards every turn. Be able to just bind it and is removed from the board. That can't get it back from the drop zone. It is in the bind zone. And there's currently, at least to my knowledge, no way. I guess shooting Doge, maybe. Anyway, most decks can't get cards back from their bind zone. So we really like that, especially for something like Ava. But then also on top of that, it has another skill that it gives to your Vanguard, which is that if your opponent has no rear guards whatsoever, your 2 rear guards in the front row get 5,000 power until the end of turn. So nice little power up for your rear guards. There's a couple of those going on in here. So it ends up just helping you make some really good numbers after you've cleared the board, which is not hard to do in this deck. So 3 copies, you can play it from the drop zone, so really you have 6 copies. Definitely don't feel like you need to run 4. And then we are just running 3 more copies of Vermillion himself. I'm not actually running the Grail order. Doesn't feel super necessary in this deck. And then also, because of Eternal Thunderbolt, you're going to be playing that every single turn. You can't play the Grail because you can only play 1 per turn. So you're always going to want to play Eternal Thunderbolt. So no Grail in this deck. That's it for the grade 3s. Let's talk about some grade 2s. My favorite one in this deck is actually Drag Ritter Latifa. I think that's how you say her name. Yeah, that's what we're going with, Latifa. So this is the generic triple rare from set 11. Now, its first skill is the same as all the other generic triple rares from set 11, which is if it was placed on rearguard other than by a unit card's ability, you can Soul Blast 1, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, assuming you played in order this turn. Call a card with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard from among them, reveal it, call it to the board. And if it is a order card, you can put it into your hand. So, why this is so good? Because you're always playing an order with Eternal Thunderbolt, whether it be from your hand or your drop. It doesn't matter. It still counts as playing the order, which means her skill is live. So it is a Dragon Empire deck where we are being able to check the top card and call it to the board, which is plussing to your board or something Dragon Empire cannot usually easily do. So we love that for itself, of just being able to keep searching for our pieces, call them to the board. But then its second skill says, if your opponent is at grade 3 or greater, she gets 5,000 power for each of your opponent's empty rearguard circles. So she just also synergizes very well with Vermillion because she is almost certainly always going to have nothing in the same column of her in your opponent's side. So she's always going to be a 20k beater, almost certainly. So it helps make really good numbers. 25 by herself if you've comboed with Eternal Thunderbolt, because it's giving her 5k and then her own skill. So 25 by herself, 35% of my turn, just hitting really good numbers. So I like her a lot for that, and then also helping me just plus to my board. Next, we are running 4 copies, unsurprisingly, of Draconic Death Scythe. So, another old boy returning here. Really good card in this deck. 2 skills going on. First is that if your opponent has no front row rear guards, which is going to be basically always in this deck, he gets an extra 5,000 power. So another just good beater. Hitting 20 by himself, comboed with Eternal Thunderbolt if your opponent doesn't have rear guards. 15 at least if they don't have a front row. Just good, hitting good numbers with that. Then though, his second skill is when he attacks a Vanguard, if you have a grade 3 with Vermillion in its card name, and also the Narcomi clan, you can Soul Blast 2. If you do, you get to bind one of your opponent's rear guards, just like that. Doesn't matter where it is, front row, back row, doesn't matter. Soul Blast 2, bind it. But if they didn't have a rear guard to bind, you can just draw a card. So great, really great card. Helps clear out the board even more to make sure you have Eternal Thunderbolt's 5k to rear guards live, and also just draw a card if they don't already. So not much really else to say, pretty self-explanatory as to why we run that at 4. Just a really strong card to keep up both pressure from the power and taking things off the board and drawing cards. And lastly, just rounding out the grade 2 slot, we're running 2 extra copies of the grade 2 from the ride line, Thunderstorm Dragoon. So his second skill, and the reason why we run him at 2, is pretty simple. When he's placed on rear guard, if you have a Vanguard with Narcomi in its clan, you get to Soul Charge 1, and he gets 5,000 power. It's mainly here for the Soul Charge. We have a pretty hefty amount of Soul Blast. You've already seen some of it with both Latifa and Draconic Death Scythe Soul Blasting 1 and 2 respectively. So having some extra Soul Charge is nice. So we run 2 extra copies of him for that reason. And plus the 5,000 power for that turn, especially in the early game, is good too. For the grade 1s, we are running, again, should be no shocker here, 4 copies of Rising Phoenix. Just keeping the nostalgia train going. Really good card. This card, again, 2 skills working here. The first one is the most important one, which is from your drop zone. If you have bound a card or played an order this turn, so long as you have a Narcomi Vanguard, you can Soul Blast 1 and call this card to rearguard circle. So this is really good. This is your main avenue for multi-attack, is once you've swung with Vermillion, if you hit some rear guards on your opponent's side, they're bound, you can just call these out to the rear guard circles in the front. It is a little awkward and not a consistent multi-attack, just because, again, it's reliant on your opponent having things to bind, and then you're also potentially calling over things like Latifa and Death Scythe that are really good rearguards that you don't necessarily want to lose, but it is multi-attack when you need it. The second skill is also pretty good too, though, which is during the main phase, you can retire him and choose one of your units and give it 5,000 power. So it's a good way to just recycle him. You call him out during the battle phase, and then next turn you can just sack him again, power some stuff up on your board. And it can be Vermillion, it can be Latifa, Death Scythe, whatever you want to power up. But it's your main avenue to multi-attack, plus just getting things on the board. Also a really good discard target for ride phase. So 4 copies. Next is a little bit, getting into some tech slots here for both grade 1s and the deck in general. I personally really like 2 copies of Stealth Dragon Tigarashi, something like that. I don't think that's 100% correct, but we'll go with it. His skill's pretty straightforward. If you discard him from hand during your turn, you get to put him into your soul instead of the drop zone. Straightforward, to the point. Really like that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, obviously during the beginning of the game, discarding for ride line, you can just discard this, throw it straight into your soul. But also, Vermillion discards for the damage ping. So if you have this in your hand, paying someone for damage, you can just discard this and whoop, it just goes into the soul. And can fuel a multitude of things, Death Scythe, Phoenix. Great. So we run 2. If you want to run more than this, honestly, I wouldn't blame you. I might go up in this, but for right now, we're running it as a 2 of tech, just for the have something to discard and just throw it into the soul to fuel that soul. The other kind of tech slot I'm running that I don't think anyone else, at least I haven't seen anyone else running this really, is I am actually running 2 copies of Beat Up Draco Kid. Now, his second skill technically says when he's placed on rearguard, you counterblast 1, and you can search your deck for up to 1 copy of a Serious Fight, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck. Serious Fight is a different order card. I believe that is like Counterblast, Soul Blast, or Soul Blast to retire opponent's rearguard. Doesn't really matter because we're not running it in this deck. That's not why we're running this. We're running this because its first skill, which says if you played a normal order this turn, he gets 5,000 power. So why are we running that if that's the only reason for not even running the other order? Because for just playing Eternal Thunderbolt, again, doesn't matter if I play it from the drop or from my hand, this just becomes a 13k booster. Now, you should never underestimate the value of hitting good numbers. If you notice that this deck, there's not really a whole lot of boosters. You have Phoenix, who just sacks himself and goes back to the drop zone. You have Tigarashi, who I'm discarding to go to Soul, but not really a whole lot of boosters. This guy's a 13k booster. Now, behind Latifa, that's 33 non-persona right turn. Persona right turn, that's 43. 48 if I have Eternal Thunderbolt live. Behind Death Scythe, similar situation. His skill's live, Thunderbolt's live, Eternal Thunderbolt's live. That's 20, 33 non-persona right turn, 43 persona right turn. You just make some really good numbers between your main 2 attackers that just aren't really there otherwise. and it can just help you really push that damage and just hit for attacks that your opponent can't stop. So I really like having the 13k boosters in the deck just to really be able to hit some really good numbers, which again, never underestimate the value of really good numbers. So I like 2 copies of that. And then we are running the other booster, 2 copies of Red River Gajoon in the main deck because of his second skill, which says when he boosts, if you have a grade 3, that's an Arcami Vanguard, just like a lot of the other cards. Counter +1, choose an opponent's back row rear guard, bind it. So it's another source of just getting rid of pesky units that you just couldn't hit because your opponent had too many rear guards. This can just take out a back row, which is very good. But then he also says, if they don't have anything to bind, you can just soul charge too. So really good at just, like I said, taking out pesky back row rear guards that are then just bound permanently, which can also just activate then Phoenix. But if they don't have anything, this can also just help fuel up your soul and soul charge too, which is very needed in this deck. So I like 2 more copies of him. But if you want to play around with those ratios, run like more Tigarashi, more beat up Draco Kid, more Red River, like you certainly can. I'm doing a 2-2-2 of each right now. And I kind of like that, but I may change that up later. But for right now, I think it's a pretty good mix. Oh, and then, yeah, finally also, yes, we are obviously doing your standard Sanctitude, 3 of the Nation Perfect Guard. Nation Perfect Guard says if you have 1 or less card in your hand, you don't have to discard for the cost. Sanctitude just says if they have triple drive text, that you don't have to discard. And then also because it's a blitz order, it's a perfect guard that gets around guard restricts. So pretty straightforward stuff. Trigger lineup. We are doing 4 copies of the effect crit. The go to soul, then this deck can kind of matter because there's a good amount of soul blast as you've seen. So some emergency soul charge is nice. The 2k doesn't really matter, but the emergency soul does. And then to round out the crits, we are just running 3 generics. I'm being silly and running 3 different generics, but you can run whichever ones you want. 7 crit, pretty important in this deck, just to keep pressure up with the big numbers that we can hit and just hit the crits to seal out the game. Pretty straightforward. Now, aside from Death Scythe, there's not a whole lot of draw power, and you are discarding for Vermillion skill. So we're running 4 draws to make up for that. You don't really need the fronts, because like I said, between Latifa, Death Scythe, Eternal Thunderbolt, you're hitting some pretty good numbers already, so fronts aren't necessarily needed, but the draw power is. So 4 draws. For heals, right now I'm actually just doing 4 generic. I know there's a lot of crits and restands going in the meta right now, and I could definitely easily be swayed to running like 2 restands, 1-1 of the crit, and the restand, or even a 2-2, but there's also something really to be said, honestly, for doing just 4 15s, just to always have the 15k shield, regardless of what you're against or what the situation is. So for right now, I'm doing 4 generic in this deck. Honestly, I could be swayed, like I said, that you could make a very strong argument for any of the lineups. I feel like just for right now, I'm liking 4 generic. And lastly, the Overtrigger, no shocker, we're running the Dragon Empire OT. I don't really think either the red or blue Festival Collection OTs is better than this. This isn't Keter Sanctuary. This isn't one of those decks that I've featured on the channel. Dragon Emperor OT is the Dragon Empire OT. If you check this and restand your Vanguard, that's just insane pressure. Especially in like with this deck. Yeah, the damage ping is once per turn, but that attack on your opponent's extra rear guard is not once per turn. That's just an effect that your Vanguard has for the rest of the turn. So if you restand Vermillion and attack again, you can attack 2 more rear guards and bind 2 more rear guards if Eternal Thunderbolt is live, which it's usually going to be. So you could just clear someone's whole board if you check this well on Vermillion. So that's just way too strong. Restanding your Vanguard is just an incredibly strong skill. So of course we're just gonna run that. I can't think of any Dragon Empire deck where you wouldn't just want to run this. So that's what we got. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, I'm liking this deck. It's kind of similar to like the Hazel deck profile that I talked about. It's not the most insane deck. It's not going to be clearing anything out, especially with Minerva, Ballista, Gandiva. But it's a fun deck. I enjoy it. It also can really trip up some people because they're not used to just things that can consistently bound and remove. Like Messiah, yeah, can take one card away, bind one card once per turn. But with this, you're taking multiple cards and they just cannot get them back. So it's a good kind of rogue anti-meta deck. There's certain things that just really struggle, like Ava, which is now not as strong as it was, but still definitely a good deck after set 11 with its new support. And they don't know what to do with this. So I like it. It's a fun deck. I'm enjoying it. Another deck that's going to be entering a fun promo cycle of going to have to get the really good promo that makes this deck a lot better. And have to deal with that all over again. So that'll be fun. But otherwise, I'm enjoying playing this deck just right now for funsies. It's a solid deck and also really cheap and easy to build. Like, you're really building pretty much entirely out of this set. Like, I think the only cards I'm running, aside from perfect guards and triggers that weren't just in set 11, is Tigarashi. And like I said earlier, there's definitely things you could run instead of Tigarashi. Like, Beat Up is from set 11. You could just run more Beat Up. You could run more copies of this. Like, easy deck to build. And definitely very affordable and fun. So if you're looking for a deck that's cheap, not hard to build, and relatively easy to pilot and still fun and still pretty good, this deck will get you pretty far. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're newer to the game. Not a whole lot you really need to think about with this deck and can do pretty well. So yeah, happy to answer any questions that anyone has. It's a fun deck. Hit me up with any comments, and otherwise we will talk to you guys and see you soon. Thanks.